So being fat matters more than family, huh? My sister sobbed those words at me with those red, swollen eyes of someone who was convinced she was the victim of the situation. My parents were right there across the table with that family tribunal look, arms crossed, the expression of people who had been rehearsing their speech for weeks. I looked at each of them, slowly, and I smiled. Not out of nerves, I was long past nerves. I smiled because I knew what was about to happen. I said, "Believe me, I care," and I hit play. My family's expressions shattered like glass. But for you to understand what was in that video, what happened when that audio started playing in that room, and why that moment was the end of a story that had been building for over 3 years, you need to understand how we got there, because none of this came out of nowhere. Cruelty rarely comes out of nowhere. It builds slowly, brick by brick, through comments at dinner, through looks in locker rooms, through doctors' visits that never investigated what they needed to investigate. You're going to hear a lot in this story. You're going to hear about a man who called himself a health professional and used his clients' bodies as locker room punchlines. You're going to hear about a family that confused humiliation with love and thought that was going to last forever. You're going to hear about a doctor who, in 40 minutes of consultation, found what nobody wanted to look for in 4 years. And you're going to hear about the moment I decided that the story they had been telling about me was going to be rewritten, with receipts, with dates, with their own words. None of them knew what I was quietly putting together while they slept soundly. And when they found out, when the play button started rolling, it was too late to erase anything. Because the body they spent years trying to turn into a source of shame became, in the end, the most eloquent proof that they were wrong about absolutely everything. If you have ever been treated like a problem to be solved, not a person to be heard, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell. And tell me in the comments, what professional or family member has done that to you? When did someone who was supposed to help you use your body as a verdict on your character? Tell me, because you are not alone in this, and your story deserves to be heard too. Now let me tell you how we got here. My name is Jasmine. I'm 31 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, out in East Nashville, in a 2-bedroom apartment I pay for myself. And I've been working as a freelance graphic designer for the past 6 years. I'm not the protagonist of this story because I was some kind of victim who couldn't help herself. I'm the protagonist because I put up with more than I should have for longer than I needed to. And because when I finally decided enough was enough, I did it with a precision that certain people did not see coming from me. I've always been that way, quiet to absorb, quick to observe, slow to blow up. But when I blow up with documentation. Before all of this happened, my life was genuinely good. I had clients who respected me, a portfolio I'd built from scratch, a routine that worked, real friends, especially Keisha, my Keish, who I've known since high school and who is a professional photographer, and the person who knows me best in this world. I loved cooking on Sundays, finding new spots along Gallatin Road, binge-watching shows with takeout pizza, until 2 in the morning without a single ounce of guilt. I was a fat woman, always had been. That wasn't what defined my life. It was just a detail about my body, until the people around me decided it wasn't. My body is 238 pounds. I'm 5'4". I wear a size 18. I like my legs. They're strong. I don't love my stomach, but I didn't love it much before I heard what I heard, and after hearing it, things got a lot worse for a while. Today I have a more peaceful relationship with it, but we'll get there. The thing is, my body was always a topic at home, for as long as I can remember. My family, Mama Beverly, Daddy Ronald, Sister Brianna the youngest, Brother Marcus in the middle, never learned the difference between concern and control. For them, talking about my weight was an act of love. Talking about my weight in front of company was especially loving. Talking about my weight at my grandmother's birthday, with the whole family watching, was the absolute pinnacle of maternal care. Brianna was thin, tall, long hair, one of those women who eat 3 pieces of sweet potato pie at Thanksgiving and still button their jeans on the drive home. Not because she had discipline, purely genetics, but the family never saw it that way. In their version, Brianna was thin because she took care of herself, and I was fat because I didn't care. That was the lie they told me for so long I started to believe it. My mama, Beverly, started in with the comments when I was about 12. Nothing explicit at first. It was the look at my plate, the smaller portion she'd served me without asking. The, "You don't want any more, do you?" before I'd even finished. Over time, it got more direct. When I was around 15, "You need to get up and move around more, Jasmine." When I was 18, "Look at those jeans, baby. Aren't they getting a little snug on you?" When I left for Tennessee State and came home for winter break, "Lord, you put on even more weight. Nashville's doing you no good." My daddy never said much, but his silence was a way of agreeing with everything. When Mama talked, He looked at his plate. He didn't defend me. He didn't push back. He just let it happen, which is, I learned later, also a choice. Marcus got uncomfortable. I could feel it, but he never said anything either. Brianna repeated what Mama said, not out of malice. She was young. She learned the script she'd been handed, but learning it doesn't excuse using it. And repeating it for years without ever questioning it has consequences. So I grew up in that house knowing that my body was the family's problem. Not the only problem, but mine, specifically mine, the one I was supposed to fix before I could exist in peace in that environment. And when I was 26 years old, I made a decision that seemed like a good one at the time. I started working with a trainer, not for them, or at least that's what I told myself. But looking back, I was still so saturated with their voices that I couldn't really tell where my own motivation ended and theirs began. That's how I ended up at Derek Holloway's studio. The studio was called Peak Form Training, the name of a gym that wants to seem more than it is. It was on 8th Avenue South in the Melrose neighborhood. A small, renovated space, good equipment, and a wall of mirrors that I never quite figured out were there to help me watch my form, or to remind me constantly of how I looked. Derek Holloway was maybe 35, personal trainer build, car salesman smile. In the initial consultation, he was professional and personable, talked about periodization, functional training, body recomposition, everything wrapped in scientific vocabulary. He charged $350 a month on the quarterly plan, what he called exclusive access to the method. I paid it. I thought I was investing in myself. The first 2 months were actually fine. Training 3 times a week, real gains in strength, better energy. I enjoyed it. I felt capable. Month 3 was when he started. It wasn't an explosion. It was the slow drip of someone who knows exactly how far they can push without crossing a visible line. The first time it was a joke, the kind he'd toss out into the air and everyone would laugh because he was the trainer, and the other women laughed along. So I smiled too because I didn't yet know that I was allowed to not smile. I had just finished a squat circuit and was in my rest period, catching my breath, hands on my knees. He walked over, looked at me, and said with that "do you a favor" voice, "That set was painful just to watch. With this level of conditioning, you're going to need a whole lot more than willpower, you know that?" I pretended I hadn't heard it right, but I had heard it. The body records these things before the mind catches up. The next week, during a HIIT session, when I slowed my pace because I felt my breathing lock up in a way I recognized, which is completely normal for someone still building cardio, he stopped beside me, crossed his arms and said, without lowering his voice, in front of me and the 3 other women in the room, "I had a client exactly like this before. Similar body type, similar output. They always quit. I'm hoping you break that pattern." I looked at him. The other women looked away. One of them, who I later learned was named Tanya, looked at me with an expression I couldn't read in that moment, but that I would understand much later. I didn't leave. I didn't leave because I'd already paid for the quarter. I didn't leave because I thought maybe he was right. I didn't leave because his voice and my mama's voice had started sounding exactly the same inside my head. And when 2 voices say the same thing, you start to treat it like fact. I stayed, and he kept going. There was one session, a rainy Tuesday in June, that burned itself into my memory with the precision of a scar. There were 5 of us in the afternoon group. Me, 3 women I recognized by face, and 1 who had just started that week. The workout was endurance-based. 4-station circuit, 3 rounds, minimal rest. On the second round, I had to stop for a second at the burpee station because I felt my breathing lock up in that specific way I'd known since I was a kid. Not weakness, the mild exercise-induced bronchospasm I'd had my whole life whenever the intensity spiked too fast. I stopped, hands on my knees, tried to regulate my breathing. Derek came toward me with the walk of someone who is going to handle a problem, stopped right in front of me and said, with that calm voice that's somehow worse than shouting, "What happened?" I said, "I had to stop for a second. My breathing." He said, "Jasmine, everybody stops when the workout gets hard. But hard and impossible aren't the same thing." I said, "I know. I just needed," he said, "Do you know how many calories you've had today before coming in?" I went quiet. He said, still in that same even tone, "Because when the fuel isn't right, the engine stalls. Plain and simple." The new client looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. The other 3 were staring at the floor. I said, with a voice steadier than I felt, "I ate appropriately before training." He said, with a small smile, "You think you did, but the body doesn't lie." That phrase stayed with me for days. The body doesn't lie. Like my body was betraying a truth he could see and I was trying to hide. Like fatigue and difficulty were confession of moral failure. Much later, when I understood what was actually happening inside my body, when I saw the numbers on the labs that Dr. Simmons never ordered, I thought about that phrase and understood the size of the cruel inversion it contained. My body wasn't lying. My body was sick. And the illness had a name, a treatment, and could have been found with a basic blood panel. But that June afternoon, I just resumed the circuit with my breathing still unsteady, finished the workout, picked up my bag, and walked out without saying a word. I accumulated it. I accumulated it because I didn't yet know there was another option. My family watched all of it from a distance and, from a distance, kept pouring gas on the fire. On a Saturday call, Mama asked how training was going. I said it was going. She said, "But are you still at the same weight?" I said, "Mama, I'm not weighing myself every 5 minutes." She said, "Baby, if you don't track it, you don't know if you're making progress. You're paying for results. You need to hold him accountable." I said, "I'm holding who I need to hold accountable." And I ended the call. Marcus texted me that week saying a buddy of his had a calorie-counting app he thought might help and sent me the link. I didn't respond. Brianna posted on the family group chat a photo of a colorful grain bowl with the caption, "New week, new start." No tag, no name. But I knew who it was for. We all did. These were small things, each one deniable on its own. I wasn't talking about you. It was just a general post. I only sent the link because I thought you'd like it. I only asked because I care. That's what makes this kind of fat-shaming so effective. Every piece, on its own, looks innocent. It's the pattern over time that shows you what it actually is. I needed to understand what was happening with my body. I'd been training for 6 months and despite feeling stronger, the scale didn't move. My energy stayed low. I'd sleep all night and wake up exhausted. I was losing hair in ways I kept chalking up to stress. I was cold all the time, even in Nashville's August heat, which made no kind of sense. I decided to see a doctor. Dr. Gregory Simmons was a general practitioner, office off Charlotte Avenue in the Sylvan Park neighborhood, recommended by a girlfriend. At the first visit, he weighed me, took my blood pressure, reviewed the records I brought, and said, "Your previous labs look fine. What you need is consistency with your workout and attention to your diet." I told him I'd been training 3 times a week for 6 months. He said, "Then the issue is diet. Are you eating late at night?" I said I didn't think so. He said, "Jasmine, the basic principle of weight loss is simple. Have you tried just eating less and moving more?" I closed my mouth, paid the copay, left with a 1,200-calorie meal plan and the certainty that the defect was mine. I went back 4 months later because the hair loss had gotten worse and I was carrying a tiredness that no amount of sleep seemed to touch. He took my pressure, weighed me again, noted I'd gone up 2 pounds. He looked at me and said, "Look at these numbers. 2 pounds up since your last visit. What happened?" I said I didn't know, that I was following the meal plan, that I was still training. He said, "Jasmine, I've given you every tool there is. At this point, the problem is your lack of discipline. There's no other explanation." I looked at him, thought about asking about hormones, thought about bringing up the hair loss, the exhaustion, the cold that wouldn't quit, but he'd already closed my chart. The appointment was over. I paid and left. Meanwhile, Derek kept up with his method, which I now know was no method at all. It was a humiliation system with technical vocabulary layered on top. On a Thursday in August, I was at the studio doing upper body work when a new group came in. 4 women he was enrolling in a special program he called a transformation series. He introduced them to me and the other women already there as examples of what the program could do. They were all thin, smiling. The kind of before and after photo he used on Instagram. After they went to the other room, Derek came back to where I was and said, with that loose smile of his, "See that? That's what happens when somebody actually commits. Doesn't matter how hard you train if you go home and eat it all back. Training is 20%. The rest is what you put in your mouth." I'd had a grilled chicken salad for lunch, black coffee for my afternoon snack. I'd shown up with the meal-prepped container my own nutritionist had put together, the one I was paying for out of pocket. But he didn't know that, and it wouldn't have mattered, because the statement wasn't about food, it was about me. I wanted to say, "You know nothing about my diet, my medical history, my body, or what is happening inside it. You know how to count macros and program workouts. That does not qualify you to speak on my discipline, my character, or my relationship with food." But I stayed quiet, packed up my water bottle, grabbed my bag, and walked out before the session was over. I got home at 8 o'clock that night, sat down on the bathroom floor, and stared at the mirror across from me for however long it was. I didn't cry. I was beyond crying. I was in that numb place that happens when you've absorbed too much for too long and the system just shuts down for a moment. I called Keisha. She picked up on the second ring the way she always does. I told her everything, not just that day, everything. The months with Derek, Dr. Simmons, my family, Brianna being held up as the mirror of who I could be. I talked for nearly 2 hours. Keisha was quiet when I finished. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. Jasmine, I need to say something you might not want to hear, but I'm saying it because I've known you for 15 years, and I love you for real. What you are describing is abuse, not the dramatic kind people usually picture. But what that trainer does to you is abuse. What that doctor does is negligence. And what your family does, what they have always done, is conditioning. You are not weak. You have been systematically convinced that you were. I was quiet for a long time. She kept going. And one more thing. What you're describing, the exhaustion that never goes away, the hair loss, the weight that won't move no matter what you eat or how much you work out, feeling cold in the middle of summer, that is not a lack of discipline. That has a cause. Have you ever had your thyroid checked? I said no. She said, then that's the first thing you do. That conversation with Keisha shifted something in me. Not a lightning bolt of instant clarity, more like a window that opened 1 inch and let in just enough air to remind me that the temperature was different on the other side. I didn't go back to Derek's studio the next week, or the week after. I texted to cancel my plan and didn't respond to the follow-up messages he sent. I blocked him. That was that. With Dr. Simmons, I spent another month paralyzed before doing anything. Not because I didn't know I needed to, but because the idea of walking into another office and hearing another version of "it's your lack of discipline" froze any initiative before it could start. It was Keisha who found Dr. Simone Carter, endocrinologist, office in the Green Hills area off Abbott Martin Road. Keisha had researched reviews, read patient testimonials, verified her credentials. She said, "This one seems like good people. Make the appointment." I made it for a Tuesday in October. The consultation with Dr. Carter was the first time in 4 years I walked out of a doctor's office not feeling worse than when I'd walked in. She didn't weigh me when I came in. She didn't comment on my body. She said good morning, shook my hand, asked what brought me in, and listened. Actually listened. Not the kind of listening that's really just waiting for your turn, but the kind that asks questions, takes notes, says at the right moments, and does not look at the clock. When I finished, she said, "What you're describing has some very specific characteristics. Before I draw any conclusions, I want to run a full set of tests. Thyroid function, the antibodies that show whether the immune system is attacking the gland, blood sugar levels, vitamin D, the body's iron stores, and several others. Can you get these done this week?" I said yes. She said, "One more thing. Did you come in alone today?" I said yes. She said, "Good. You made a smart decision coming in. Simple as that." But I'd needed 4 years and a professional who systematically dismantled my self-worth to understand the weight of that simple sentence. The results came back in 5 days. The thyroid hormone was completely out of range, far outside what it should be. The thyroid itself was producing below the minimum it needed to. The antibodies that signal an autoimmune attack on the thyroid came back positive and elevated. Vitamin D was dangerously low, severe deficiency. The body's iron stores were critically low, the kind of result that explains constant hair loss and exhaustion. The body was struggling to process sugar properly, which makes weight gain harder to fight and weight loss nearly impossible. I stared at that report for about 10 minutes before calling Keisha. She answered and I said, in a voice that wasn't quite crying but was standing right at the edge of it, "My thyroid isn't working because my own immune system is attacking it. My vitamin D is dangerously low. My body's iron stores are critically low. And my body is struggling to process sugar properly." Keish, Dr. Carter ordered these tests in 40 minutes of consultation. Dr. Simmons saw me for 4 years and never ordered a single one of them. Keisha was quiet for a beat. Then she said softly, "I know. I knew it was going to be something like this." At the follow-up with Dr. Carter, she walked me through the whole picture with a patience I had never encountered in a medical office before. The thyroid was being attacked by the immune system itself. The body, for a reason medicine is still studying, starts treating its own gland as a threat. The thyroid is the gland that regulates metabolism, body temperature, energy levels, hair, mood. When it isn't functioning properly, the metabolism slows down. You gain weight even when you're eating less. You feel cold when it's hot outside. You sleep 8 hours and wake up exhausted. You work out and can't lose weight, because the body's mechanism that would make that happen is no longer working the way it should. The dangerously low vitamin D was making the exhaustion worse and leaving the immune system even more vulnerable. The critically low iron stores were causing exactly the kind of hair shedding I'd been describing, and the body's difficulty processing sugar, driven partly by the untreated thyroid condition, was making weight regulation even harder. I had a cluster of real, identifiable health conditions that show up on a basic blood test. Conditions my previous doctor never ordered tests for because he had already decided the problem was behavioral. Dr. Carter looked at me after she finished explaining and said, I want to ask you something, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to. How many times were you told that your weight was a problem of not trying hard enough? I said, years of it. She said, that's the part of this that bothers me most, because everything you were describing, every single symptom, is consistent with this condition. And it doesn't get treated with willpower. It gets treated with the right medication and proper medical follow-up. Someone should have investigated this a long time ago. That didn't make me cry. It made me feel something colder and more precise than tears. It made me feel right. I started treatment, medication for the thyroid at the right dose, vitamin D in a higher amount to bring the levels back up quickly, iron replenishment, monthly monitoring. Dr. Carter also referred me to a registered dietitian, Lauren Mosley, RD, practice in the Midtown area, who was the first nutrition professional who started our consultation by asking about my emotional relationship with food before asking what I was eating. I said it was complicated. She said, it always is. We're going to work through that together. And I found a new gym, Stronghurst Studio, over on Woodland Street in East Nashville, with a trainer named Dominique Walsh who asked me, in our very first session, what I wanted to feel during our workouts. Not what I wanted to lose, what I wanted to feel. I thought for a second and said, I want to feel strong. She said, perfect. That's exactly what I work toward. The difference between Derek's studio and Dominique's class was the difference between being studied as a problem and being treated as a person. She didn't comment on my body during the initial assessment. She asked about injury history, what I enjoyed doing, what left me wiped out too fast. When I mentioned the thyroid condition, she said, okay, so we're going to work with your recovery pace. No rushing. The progress that matters is the kind you can sustain. Nobody had ever said that to me before. Lauren, in our early sessions, didn't give me any kind of plan at first. She asked questions. How did I feel before eating, during, after? Were there times I ate when I wasn't hungry? Were there foods I ate in ways that felt compulsive? Were there situations that triggered the urge to eat in a way that felt automatic? I answered, and I started to understand slowly that a lot of my relationship with food had been built on guilt. Guilt that wasn't originally mine, but that I'd absorbed through years of commentary about what I put on my plate. The occasional late-night overeating wasn't a character flaw. It was an emotional regulation mechanism for the chronic stress of living in an environment that constantly told me I needed to be different. That doesn't get resolved in one session, but naming it is the first step. The first results from treatment showed up around 6 weeks in. The exhaustion started to lift. The constant cold let up. The hair loss began to thin out. I started sleeping through the night and waking up actually rested, something that hadn't happened in so long that I'd normalized chronic fatigue as a feature of my personality. There were hard days, weeks when the scale didn't move, and I felt the pull of those old voices telling me it was my fault. Lauren helped me catch those moments. Dominique reminded me, every time I left a session frustrated, that progress in training is almost never linear, especially with a metabolic condition actively being treated. Dr. Carter adjusted my medication with the patience of someone who understood that the body takes time to recalibrate. I kept showing up, but this time by choice, not by resignation. Keisha knew everything. She told me, you're doing the right thing. Document everything. I documented everything. Meanwhile, my family started noticing something had changed in me, without knowing exactly what. On calls with Mama, I'd gotten quieter, more deliberate. Whenever she tried to steer toward food or my weight, I'd say I'm managing that with my doctor, thanks, and change the subject. She was uncomfortable with it. The discomfort was on purpose. Daddy tried a different approach at a Sunday dinner I showed up to, the closest thing to an overture he could manage, which was commenting that I seemed lighter. I said, are you talking about weight? He said, no, just your expression. I said, oh, and kept eating. Brianna sent a text with a link to an intermittent fasting video and a heart emoji. I sent back, my specialist said fasting isn't recommended for my situation, but thanks, nothing more. They were used to the version of me that absorbed things, that smiled, that pretended not to hear. This new version that responded with clarity and firmness left them with nowhere to go. And then came Tanya Pratt. I had been out of Derek's studio for 5 months when Keisha texted me at 11 on a Wednesday night. Jasmine, you're going to want to see this, but not tonight. Let's meet tomorrow, okay? It's not bad. It's important. We met at Barista Parlor on Gallatin Road the next morning. Keisha had her laptop. She sat down across from me. We ordered 2 coffees and she said, I want to introduce you to someone. She couldn't make it in person today, but she said she'd talk to you if you want. She opened the laptop and showed me an Instagram profile. Personal trainer, Nashville, specializing in training women. Recent stories, a series of posts about fat shaming in gyms. The name was Tanya Pratt. I looked at Keisha. She was the client who looked at me that day. We did a video call that afternoon. Tanya was maybe 33, natural hair, direct eyes, no small talk. She said, "Jasmine, I was a client of Derek's for almost a year. I left after he told me, in front of other people, that I was a hopeless case and that he was doing me a favor charging what he charged, because the way I was going I'd keep gaining weight regardless of anything I did. I walked out that same day, asked for my money back, and he refused, said I'd broken the contract." She paused, then said, "So I started figuring out that I wasn't alone, found 4 other former clients with similar stories. We formed a group, and at some point someone in that group saved an audio recording from a private trainers group chat in Nashville that he was in." Keisha paused the screen and looked at me. I said, "Keep going." Tanya continued, "In that audio he talks about clients by name, mocking them. Says he takes on fat women because they pay up front and don't complain as much at the start. Says they almost never make it to the end of the quarter because they quit, and by then the money is already his. Says it's an easier business model than working with athletes." I felt my stomach tighten. She said, "Jasmine, you're mentioned by name." I was quiet for a moment. Keisha was watching me. I said, "You have that recording?" She said, "I do. And I have the chat history with timestamps. And I have statements from the other 4, and I have an attorney." I asked, "What do you want to do with it?" She said, "Whatever you want. You were named. You have a say in what happens here. But I thought you needed to know." There was a long pause. Then I said, "Send me the audio." I listened to it that night. It was exactly what she'd described. Derek's voice was unmistakable. I'd listened to it for months telling me I had no discipline, that I was weak, that I was a lost cause. And there, in a group chat with other trainers laughing along, he laid out the business model. The fat women were his most reliable revenue stream. They paid, tolerated, and when they left, they'd already paid for at least 1 full quarter. My name was in there, with adjectives I won't repeat here, but that are engraved in my memory with the precision of a scar. I called Keisha after listening. Couldn't get words out on the first try. On the second, she said, "What do you want to do, Jasmine?" I said, "I need a few days, but I already know what I'm going to do." What I didn't know yet was that during those same days, my family was organizing a conversation with me. A conversation they were calling concern, and that I already knew was not. Mama called on a Wednesday and said she'd set up a Sunday dinner at her house, that Marcus would be there, Brianna, Daddy, that they wanted to talk about me. She used exactly those words. She said, "About you." I said, "All right, I'll be there." I spent the following days doing what I do when I need to prepare for something, organizing. I talked to Tanya, to the other former clients, to the attorney they had retained. I talked to Keisha, who helped me edit and sequence the material. I talked to Dr. Carter, who walked me through my rights as a patient and how to properly document a complaint for medical negligence. And I built the video. It wasn't quick. It took 3 nights, me and Keisha at her kitchen table in Inglewood, 2 monitors, 2 coffees, and enough determination to move a mountain. The video had Derek's audio with the corresponding captions. It had written statements from the other former clients with the names they had authorized. It had an explanation from Dr. Carter, recorded by her with her consent, about the thyroid condition I had, how it's diagnosed with basic blood tests, and why symptoms like mine should have been investigated years earlier. It had my actual test results with the values and what they meant. It had screenshots, with names protected where necessary, of messages from my family commenting on my body over the past 2 years. And it had, at the very end, a single line of white text on a black screen, written by me, that I'm not going to reveal right now because it appears in the confrontation. But everyone who was in that dining room on Sunday when I hit play read that line, and none of them forgot it. I pulled into Mama and Daddy's driveway at noon on Sunday. Table set, smell of smothered chicken coming from the kitchen, Mama in her apron, Daddy already seated, Marcus with his arms crossed, Brianna with a smile trying to pass for neutral but landing somewhere closer to uncomfortable. The empty chair was mine, on the outside edge of the group, like always. I sat down, ate a little, waited. It was Mama who started. She said, "Jasmine, we're worried about you." I said, "Go ahead." She said, "You're pulling away from this family. You don't respond right when we try to talk about your health, your eating. We ask how you're doing and you get defensive. That's not like you." I said, "I hear you. Go ahead." Daddy said, "We're not attacking you, baby. We want to help." I said, "I'm listening. Does anyone else want to say something?" Marcus said, uncomfortable. "We just want you to be okay," Brianna said, in the voice Mama used when she wanted to seem gentle. We worry because we love you and we want to see you happy. Healthy, Mama said, exactly. And when we see you resisting any kind of conversation about it, it makes it hard to reach you. I said, when did anyone ask me how I wanted to be helped? Mama opened her mouth, closed it. Daddy said, baby. I said, no, let me finish. Over the past few years, you've made comments about my body at family dinners, at birthday parties, in the family group chat, in direct messages. You've held Brianna up as the example of what I could be. You've sent articles, links, apps. You've asked about my weight like it was a greeting. Nobody, at any point, asked me, how are you feeling? What are you going through? What do you need? Brianna was looking at her plate. Mama said, that's not true, Jasmine. You're twisting things. I said, Mama, I have all of it documented. Dates, context, screenshots of the messages. I'm not twisting anything. I'm describing the pattern. Daddy said quietly, all of it documented? I said, all of it, including what the professional I was paying to help me was doing, and what the doctor I saw for 4 years did, or more accurately, what he didn't do. Mama said, what doctor? What professional? What are you talking about? I looked at each of them, slowly, and I said, so being fat matters more than family, huh? And I looked directly at Brianna when I said it, because those had been her words to me years ago. In a moment she probably didn't even remember. She looked thrown. She said, that's not what Mama said, her voice rising. Jasmine, don't twist what we're saying. We're saying this out of love. I said, I heard you. Lord, how careless you all have been. Daddy raised his head. Mama's mouth opened. I said, that's something y'all have said to me. In variations. For years. Believe me, I care. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, opened the video, put it on speaker, and I hit play. Derek's audio came first, his voice unmistakable, laying out the business model, describing fat clients in the terms he used in that trainer's group chat. My name, the adjectives, the number of quarters he expected to collect before any one of them gave up. His mouth fell open. Marcus turned his chair slightly. Brianna stared at the phone with an expression I couldn't name. Then came the medical records. Dr. Carter's voice explaining the condition, what causes it, how it's treated, how long it takes to get diagnosed when the right tests are actually ordered. Then the image of my own lab results, the values, the reference ranges, the date that was 4 years after my first appointment with Dr. Simmons. Mama said, baby, that doctor was incompetent, but I said, wait, it's not finished. The screenshots came next, messages from the family group chat. Mama texting Brianna privately that I needed to lose weight before Grandma's birthday, or the pictures were going to look bad. Daddy forwarding an article about morbid obesity in the family chat with a message that said, Jasmine, you need to read this. Brianna sending the intermittent fasting link, which looked innocent in isolation, but in context lined up with the other messages, showed the pattern for exactly what it was. The final line appeared on a black screen, white text, simple font, centered. You told me I needed to change because you loved me. But concern for someone's health doesn't require humiliation to exist. You didn't help me. You set me back. Complete silence in the room. Mama's eyes were wet. Daddy was staring at the wall. Marcus had his chin down. Brianna was looking at me with an expression I couldn't read right away, one I would only understand later. I put the phone away, took a sip of water, and said, in a voice that was calm because it no longer needed to be anything else, I didn't bring this to hurt you. I brought it because you called a meeting to talk about me. And I thought it was more honest to have that conversation with all the information on the table. You can say whatever you need to say now, Mama said, her voice catching. I never wanted to hurt you, Jasmine. I said, Mama, I know you think you didn't want to. That's the problem. You did it for so long in so many ways that it became part of how this family operates, and I internalized it for years. The voice inside me that said I was weak, that I had no discipline, that I was to blame for my own body. That was your voice. All of yours, that I put inside my own head. Mama said, but I never called you weak. I said, not in those words, but when you text Brianna that I need to slim down before Grandma's birthday so I won't mess up the pictures, when you forward an article about morbid obesity without once asking how I'm doing, when you make a comment about my body at a family gathering and everyone laughs along, the message that lands is, you are a problem that needs to be fixed. And when that message comes from the person who's supposed to protect you, it sticks. Silence. Daddy said with difficulty. We were wrong. I looked at him, said, yes, you were. Marcus said, I should have spoken up. I watched it happen and stayed quiet. That's on me too. I said, yes. And then Brianna said something I wasn't expecting. She said, barely above a whisper, Jasmine, I need to tell you something. And she was looking at the table, not at me. She said, Mama asked me to. Not directly, not in so many words, but she'd check in about what you were eating when I saw you. Ask me to say something when you were wearing something she thought didn't flatter you, suggest I bring things up. I never thought I was doing anything wrong because it felt like that's just what family does. But hearing it now, from the outside, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Mama turned toward her, surprised and defensive. Brianna, I never asked you to do anything wrong. Brianna said, Mama, stop. And Mama stopped. I looked at Brianna for a moment. She finally looked at me, and she said, I'm sorry, I should have seen it sooner. That's not the ending I had scripted for that Sunday dinner, but it was real, and sometimes real is better than what you imagined. I left my parents' house at 3 in the afternoon. Not at war, not in full peace either. That takes longer, but with something different in the air, an honesty that had never existed in that house before. Keisha was waiting in her car in the driveway. She looked at me when I got in. She said, how'd it go? I said, it went how it needed to. She said, the video goes up? I said, the video goes up. We posted it that afternoon. Keisha had a photography account with around 14,000 followers. Not viral, but a real audience. She posted with a simple caption, my best friend's story. I shared it on my own page. I sent the link to the community of Derek's former clients, who shared it across their own profiles. Within 48 hours, it had 800 views. Within a week, 20,000. 2 weeks later, a journalist from a Nashville health and wellness outlet reached out wanting to talk. Derek tried to respond, posted on his stories that he was being defamed by disgruntled former clients, that the audio had been taken out of context, that the accusations were false and he would be taking legal action. The attorney representing the former clients responded with a formal statement, which also circulated. The complaint filed with the Tennessee Department of Health's health-related boards was submitted with testimony from all 5 former clients, the audio authenticated by a notary, and the documented record of humiliating comments with dates and context. The investigation was opened. Within 3 months, peak form training had closed. The website went down. The Instagram was deleted. I heard through a former client that he left Nashville, but I can't say for certain. Dr. Simmons received a formal complaint filed with the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners, including my consultation history, the comparative lab findings, and a detailed account of the negligence. The resolution was still pending when I wrote this, but the complaint exists. It's on record. About my family, it was slow. There was no dramatic reconciliation scene. It was a series of hard conversations spread over months. Brianna called me 2 weeks after that dinner and said she wanted to understand me better. Not as the little sister who needed guidance, but as who I actually was. That mattered. Marcus sent a long text asking me to forgive him for staying quiet so long. I saved it. Mama was the hardest, as expected. It took her about 2 months to be able to say for real that she had been wrong. Not the performative way you see in made-for-TV reconciliations. Big cry, big hug, everything resolved. It was a short conversation on a Saturday afternoon in which she said, I think I confused taking care of you with trying to control you, and I didn't know that's what I was doing. That's the truth. But it's also true that it caused real damage. I said, I know you didn't know. And I also know that doesn't undo what it caused. Both things are true at the same time. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what do you need from me now? I said, don't ever comment on my body again. Not positively, not negatively, not as concern. My body is mine. It is not up for discussion. She said, okay, that was it. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't cinematic, but it was real, and it was the beginning of something different. Today, I wake up at 7 in the morning in my apartment in East Nashville. I drink my coffee looking out the window while the morning light comes in sideways through the linen curtains I picked out myself when I moved in. The thyroid medication is on the nightstand. I take it on an empty stomach, 20 minutes before coffee, the way Dr. Carter instructed. My thyroid hormone is in the normal range now. My vitamin D is where it should be. My body's iron stores are healthy, and the body is processing sugar properly again. I lost weight. I'm not going to hide that because it happened and it's part of the story. But I lost it as a consequence of a body that finally had the metabolic and hormonal support it needed, combined with a training practice I show up for because I want to. Not because someone told me it was the price of being acceptable. It wasn't linear. It wasn't fast. It wasn't dramatic. It was mine. I train twice a week with Dominique, who has become a friend beyond a trainer. Her question in our first session, what do you want to feel, has stayed the compass of our training ever since. The answer has changed a few times. Today, the answer is, I want to feel like myself. Keisha is still the person who picks up on the second ring. Dr. Carter is still my specialist. Lauren is still my dietitian. Brianna turned into, in a way I didn't expect, a real ally. Not because she changed completely, but because she's trying, and sometimes trying is enough to begin. Derek's case is still in process. So is Dr. Simmons. I don't follow the day-to-day details because I learned that doing so uses energy I'd rather spend somewhere else. But it exists. It's documented. It's not going away. Sometimes people ask if I regret anything. The delay in leaving Derek's studio, the delay in switching doctors, the delay in responding to my family. I don't. Those delays are part of who I was before, and who I was before brought me to who I am now. I don't discard any of it. What I would say to my past self, if I could, isn't leave sooner. It's, you are right. What they are doing to you is not care. And when you are ready to understand that, you will know what to do. Before I close out this story, I need to say something directly to you, whoever is listening right now, because someone is, I know there's someone, living some version of what I lived. Maybe not identical, maybe close enough to feel it in your chest. Medical fat shaming is real, and it is common. What happened to me was not an exception. It is what happens when healthcare providers substitute real investigation with moral judgment. You have the right to ask for testing, to ask what is being investigated and why, to change doctors when you feel judged instead of cared for. There is no loyalty you owe to someone who does not treat you like a patient. If a provider attributes every complaint you bring in to your weight without investigating other causes, that is negligence. That is not care. Symptoms like persistent fatigue, hair loss, weight that resists diet and exercise, always feeling cold, depression and anxiety can have causes in how the body's glands and hormones are functioning, and they show up on a basic blood test. Thyroid problems, ovarian disorders, the body's difficulty processing sugar, low vitamin D, low iron stores. These conditions affect millions of women and are regularly overlooked when a doctor has already decided the problem is behavioral. You can and should ask for a comprehensive set of tests. You can and should question when a diagnosis of lack of discipline is handed down without a single test being ordered. Family fat shaming is the hardest to recognize because it comes dressed up as love. Concern for someone's health does not require humiliation to exist. When the concern comes with public embarrassment, with comparison, with love conditioned on how your body looks, that is not about health. That is about control. You can love your family and still make clear that your body is not up for discussion. Those two things can coexist. Internalized fat shaming is the hardest to catch because it sounds like your own voice. It isn't. It is the voice of whoever taught you that your body was a problem, and that teaching can be unlearned. With therapy, with time, with the deliberate practice of noticing when that voice speaks up and asking where it came from. If you are with a trainer, a studio, or any professional who uses your weight as evidence of your lack of worth, leave. There is no workout that is worth the humiliation. Training exists to make your body stronger, not to destroy your sense of self. A professional who does the second while claiming to do the first is not a professional. They are someone with a certification and a pattern of abuse. If I had understood this sooner, if someone had told me at 26 that there was a difference between care and control, between concern and humiliation, between a diagnosis and a character judgment, I would have protected myself much earlier. And if you are living what I lived, please hear this. You are not wrong. Your body is not the problem. The problem has always been what was placed around it. If this story reached you in some way, if you recognized a scene, a phrase, a feeling, share it with someone who needs to hear that she is not alone. A friend, a sister, someone you know is going through this. The simple act of sending this video to one person can change something in their day. And tell me in the comments, what was the moment you stopped asking permission to exist as you are? It could have been big or small. It could have been a doctor's appointment you finally walked out of, a text message you chose not to respond to, a Sunday dinner where you hit play. Tell me. Because those moments deserve to be said out loud. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. You didn't have to, but you did. And that means more than you know. See you in the next one.